Terrific. And we are live. Louise, thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, let me just introduce our guests to what we're going to talk about. Here's the thing. Black people, like any group, have their share of what is considered taboo in their lived cultures in the diaspora. As you'd expect, many of the established taboos derive from a complex historical background, with the impacts of colonialism weaving into the original cultures of Africa to create a new, current, hybrid culture with its own taboos. Now, taboos are slow to shift or evolve, and often what is taboo in African groups is popular or embraced by the majority cultures Africans live in the diaspora. Of course, this can cause conflicts and misunderstandings between Africans and the majority communities, though just under half, for example, at 47% of people in the UK diaspora were born here. So, how are these conflicts managed? What pressures do they place on Africans living their lives abroad in the diaspora? And increasingly, on Africans living their lives on their continent of origin? Are these taboos empowering or limiting? I'm joined by Dr. Louise Owusu-Kwarteng. She's an associate professor of sociology from Greenwich University to try and unpack these issues by reference to a representative sample of 5 taboos. Of course, there are many, many, many more taboos that we could talk about, but I'm just looking at these 5 for now. If there are others that you who are listening to this program think are really significant, by all means, hit them up in the chat and please share your messages. So, Louise, great to see you.
Thank you. Likewise. Likewise.
Yeah. So I know that when we were deciding what the 5 taboos would be, we weren't a million miles apart on what our ideas were we?
No, not at all. Not at all. Because I mean, I think there's a lot of crossover, and I'm very sure that when people kind of participate in here, we're going to hear very, very similar things. So yeah.
Okay. So obviously, when we were talking about this, first thing that came to my mind was marriage and childbearing. Is it still okay in the diaspora, even though you're African, not to be married, especially as a woman? I think it's hugely unfair because, a man can gather around and do what the heck he likes. But for a woman, I think it's still a bit of a taboo. Would you agree with that or not?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think what it's to do with, again, like you talk about these historic ideas around sort of like colonialism, and then when you've got that fused in religion and you've got that fused in the sort of the cultures back home, I think there is an expectation that at a certain age you should be married and you should have kids and everything. I remember like it was very recently, it's 3 years ago. And I had broken up with my ex. This was 4 years ago, and then I kind of said to my uncle came to visit, and we were talking, and I said that no, I'm not married. I don't have children. At the time, I was 43, and then he just was a bit shocked, and I said, I don't understand why the shock. And he just said, oh well, you should you should settle down and everything, and that he was gonna pray about it. They were his words, and he was gonna kind of put in a tithe. And I just said, uncle, please just save your money, save your time, because I'm not going to, this is not going to change. And I think it's perfectly acceptable for me and for another woman, for women, if we decide that we don't want to get married, or we don't decide that we don't want to settle down, or if we do and then we decide to cohabit, it's a different sort of context and time as well, because generationally, and sometimes I think that sometimes in the past, not people married for love, but then sometimes I think it was also out of practicality as well. It was out of
economic necessity.
Yes,
in that
economically.
you needed a man to look after you. But I
Yes,
mean, yeah, I mean,
yes,
you're a PhD. I mean, you're an
mm,
associate professor. Nobody feeds you. You feed yourself.
yes,
You look after yourself. You get yourself from A to B.
yes,
So the
yes.
necessity for having a man somewhat recedes. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it also, I think, as I say, it's to do with sort of like generation as well. Because I mean, a lot of us, I mean, I was born in the 70s. I was born in the mid 70s,
Okay.
like, so
Where were
let's
you
call it,
born, Louise? Were
I was
you
born
born
in
here
Nottingham.
in
Yeah, I was born in
Nottingham?
Nottingham. I
Good
was,
Lord.
yeah.
Up north.
Robin Hood City. Hey, not there. Middle. We hold Britain together. I keep saying like we
Okay.
are the keys of the UK.
Cool.
But
Cool.
anyway, but I was born at a time when,
Mm,
like, obviously we were kind of like in that sort of second, moving into the third wave of
mm,
feminism. All right.
mm,
And the thing is, obviously I'm a black feminist and everything like that. But like, with the whole movement, there was a
mm,
shift in terms of like, what the expectations of women were. And then
mm.
also, like, I grew up with women who are actually movers and shakers. Do you know what I mean? Like, black women movers and shakers. Like,
Right.
people. I don't. I'm not saying that she's a generation behind me, but you had people like Angela Davis. All those kinds of people. Or
Role
let me.
models coming up to,
Well, yeah,
it show you how it could be another way.
yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I mean, black and white ones, because I mean, I don't like Margaret Thatcher. I hate her politics, but at the same time, you had people like that. So it kind of shifted. Okay, she was traditional in the sense that she got married or whatever, but like
Mm,
it did shift the perceptions of what woman could and could be. Like the 80s and the 80s and the 90s were really good for that. So I think there's a shift certainly amongst my generation. There's a shift in terms of what we can do and what gender role expectations are. But I think sometimes though, like growing up here, but like if you take that back home, again, I can tell you another experience that I had. Like I went to Legon 4 years ago to give a paper, and like
please tell people what Legon
sure.
is. Some people
So
don't know.
Legon is basically the University of Ghana. Yeah. So I went there to a conference and to give a paper. And this man, he just came and like he's just started rubbing my and I was just like, please don't touch me.
No
And then like,
way. Yeah.
yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
joking. I'm not joking. And then like, he was just saying, oh, like, my life isn't about academics and that, like, I'm 42, I'm too old. And I was just like, no, you just know, like, this is not, you don't tell me how to live my life. And it was a very interesting thing there, because it wasn't even just there's an intersection of issues that I think that just didn't go down well. So first of all, it's a woman answering back, and secondly is the fact that, okay, well, like,
Answering back to the man who's making this very kind of
yeah,
overt,
yeah.
total overstep of his boundaries.
Absolutely, and I don't know you from anywhere. So like, there's that. I mean, like, there's that sort of like intersection again, because okay, I wasn't born. I may be Ghanaian, but I wasn't born and raised there. So that's another thing. So like, it's like I've come from Abrotri, which means like, I've come from the West, and like, I'm talking kind of thing. And
Yeah.
then the third thing is that, like, I'm educated. So it was just a lot of issues. So I mean, I think sometimes
Culture
if you
shock for
don't,
him.
it's a culture shock for him, but it's also I don't know, like gender role expectations. There's a bit of misogynoir in there, just everything. So yeah, that's my thoughts on those things.
Mm. What about childbearing? I mean, that's really part of the package, isn't it?
Yeah,
That seems to be another big taboo. And speaking as a man, I actually have children,
mm,
but I do know this: it's not everybody's cut out for being a father. Not
yeah,
everybody's cut out for being a mother.
yeah,
And unfortunately, the title of father and mother
mm,
can present as like labels we hang on people to beautify them. It's like a
yeah,
trophy you put on your mantelpiece, like, best speaker in press for 1990, whatever it was. But actually, not everyone is cut out to be a mum.
no, no,
It's not just a biological ability to deliver the children. you've got to have a mindset which makes you a reasonable. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the thing, and you know, like they say, or even we talk about fatherhood, they say that, like anybody can be a father, but like you got, there's a difference between being a father and a dad. Do you see what I mean? So like anyone can, inseminate a woman. I think that at the end of the day, you're right. Not everybody is that nurture. I mean, it's a tricky because, like, on the one, sometimes like there'll be some people that will say like, I'm never ever going to have kids and everything like that. But then when they do, they actually grow into that role. So
Yeah. You
there is
can't
some
stop. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there are some people that are just like, nope, this is not, and then there are people that, just they are mothers and they're natural mothers and they want to have children and all this, that, and the other. So I think it's very diverse. I think it depends on the person, people, and also that people do change. And again, speaking from my own experience, I mean, I'm gonna say, I mean, I love kids. I really, really, I have a niece and two nephews who I love to pieces,
Right.
but I just don't think I could, like I'm just not, I know I'm not going to be a mother and stuff like that. And also, it's like, maybe not biologically, but then at the same time, like I have lots of students. I'm not saying that they're my kids or anything like that, but you can nurture them in a different way. Like, just like I can nurture, my niece and my nephews in a different way and everything. So, just because you don't have children, it doesn't mean to say that you can't, do that sort of thing, if you see what I mean.
Okay, Louise, can I ask you to move just a smidgen to your right so that your head's in the middle of the screen?
Yeah, is that
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, perfect. Now, what about fostering and adoption? Because there are people who want to have children, can't have children. I know that we got lots and lots of African Caribbean children in care. And this is something that you can make a massive difference in somebody's life. And actually, from what I know of it, um, often the fostering and adoption does more for the person who does the fostering and adoption,
yeah.
as much for them as it does for the children. So it's a win-win-win. I mean, what do you think about fostering and adoption?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, like there's kids out there who need that, who, would give their ITs to have a good home. And I think that, if that's what you feel that you can offer, I think that is absolutely, like go for it, because I know I have friends who have adopted their, done fostered and adopted their kids. And like, they're about my age and everything. And yes, it's a very, very long process, but they've given these children really good homes and everything. So I think if that's what, like, that's what you would like to do, I think you should go ahead and do it. Because as I say, I mean, it's interesting that you talk about African and Caribbean children. Like, you don't see that. I mean, there's an awful lot, but like sometimes, like they're not always the first ones that people will automatically adopt. Do you know what I mean? They're not always the first one. So like if people feel that they can give these kids a good home, a good upbringing, then do it. That's what I think. That's what I think.
Awesome,
And
awesome.
sometimes as well, it's just like maybe the biological parent, they can't look after their kids and stuff. So like they should have a good home if they can find one.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look, I mean, a couple of comments are coming in now. I mean, there's one here. It says from Teddy Bongo, wherever you come from, no one has a right to breach your boundaries. And that's a lady speaking about that gentleman at the University of Ghana who was kind of completely um, off and beyond his boundaries. Okay, can I move on to the second taboo? But before we do that, I want to address an elephant in the room. Every time you wave your hands, I see a most spectacular piece of jewelry. Now, I've interviewed you in a TV studio before, and you never come in with anything that is less than eye-catching. Can we please get this? What everybody's asking, what is on her finger? Okay. Wow.
It's a
Now, what
ring.
is that? Is that a ring?
Yes, it's a ring. I think it's in the shape of a poppy, but yeah, it's a ring. I bought
Is
it like we call it Betsy. I mean, I call everything that I've got Betsy, but yeah, this is Betsy.
Oh, how lovely. What
Yeah,
is that metallic or is it made out of shell?
it's just metallic. It's a
Okay,
metallic ring. Yeah.
that's
Thank you.
exquisite. Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
every time you wave your hand, folks, you're looking at Betsy.
Yeah.
In a nutshell. Okay. So the next taboo that I'm looking at now is sexual orientation. That's another big
Yeah,
one.
it is.
Basically, in our culture, in our collective culture, thou shalt not be gay. Thou shalt not be bisexual, and that is pretty much set in stone. I think it's illegal in 47 African countries. There are only 54.
Mm.
So that gives you a steer on that. So what about that for those of us in the diaspora? What do you make of that, Louise?
Well, again, I think it's a lot to do with sort of like, religion. And I'm not kind of knocking religion or anything, because I think at the end of the day, everyone has got their beliefs. But I think what's happened is that, there's sometimes a bit of an issue in terms of like, the way that certain things are interpreted. And then also what makes it worse is that people will see being gay, being LGBTQA plus as something that is a life choice. But I
Hmm.
don't think it is, because at the end of the day, people are what they are. Okay. Sometimes, like along the line, it may be that someone thinks that they are straight or whatever, but then, they find the person that they fall in love with. And then, that,
It's not
that,
what they expect.
yeah, it's not what they expect. And this is life, you know. But I think that, sometimes the way that, like, being LGBTQA plus is kind of like, represented within our communities, sometimes represented within our churches. This is what makes it more taboo. I mean, I was watching something on YouTube, and I forget what his name is, but like there's a pastor, and I was watching it and I was just thinking, God, like
Where was
this
it?
is,
Hang on a minute, Louise. Hold on. Well, where was this pastor? Were they in the
oh,
UK or were they in the States
no,
or the
no,
Caribbean
no.
or where?
No,
Or
they
Africa?
were in Africa, and his name, Pastor Martin Semper, I think his name was,
Sempe.
and
So that
he's
would make him Ghanaian? Was he Ghanaian?
no, I think he was actually Ugandan. I think
Okay,
he was
cool.
Ugandan,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, some of the things that he was saying about, like being gay, it I mean, I just thought, gosh, like there's a lot of miseducation here. I mean, like, and going into all this kind of graphic, unnecessarily information. And I think there's a bit
The
too much.
interesting thing is, if they were talking about a heterosexual couple, you would know where he'd put the boundaries on
Yeah.
graphic information.
Mm.
But when it comes to people who are gay, of course, I mean, I think he would amp it up just to trigger people more. Would you say?
Yeah, yeah, because there is a clip where he goes to this congregation, and he's just talking about this, showing all this stuff, and I'm just thinking to myself, you know what? Sometimes, and it's not just him. Sometimes there's like a fixation with what goes on in the bedroom, and it's got nothing to do with that, because at the end of the day, like people just have relationships. It's not just about that. It's about the broader relationship, and it's just about. I think there is a tendency to forget that people are people. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't matter what their sexual
They lose their
orientation is.
humanity. Okay, now,
Yeah.
Louise, I mean, let me offer the pushback now. Look,
Mm,
you're an academic.
mm,
Academics, by and large, on the liberal side of things. What
yeah.
if somebody says, "Well, yeah, what do you expect, Ted? I mean, she's an associate professor, she's a PhD, she's an academic. What do you expect from her?" They all
I
think
think
like,
that
what do you say to that?
No, I mean, then I think that's not a very intelligent way of thinking, because at the end of the day, like, even if I wasn't an academic, before I became an academic, this is the way I've always thought. So, I think you have to, people need to, and also you'll get some academics who do not think in the same way that I do. So
Right.
I think
So
that,
that's a stereotype.
yeah.
That's a bit of a stereotype, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it
Okay.
is. And I think people need, again, like people just need to be separating, like, what I do from the way, yeah, there's always a crossover between what you do and what you think. But then at the same time, like there's also just, you have to remember people's humanity as well. So
Okay.
yeah.
So what about, how do you riddle me this?
Mm,
Okay. White folk came to Africa as colonial masters
mm,
and preached all of this homophobic stuff. I'm personally not sure how much homophobia existed in Africa before the Judeo-Christian view was presented by missionaries and so on and so forth when they came to Africa. And so, the long story short, Africans grow up. Just like with the religion, it seems, and I have to be very careful here because I don't want to offend people, it seems as if we walked away with a greater belief in Christianity than the people who presented it. And secondly, with a greater sense of homophobia than the people who taught homophobia to the Africans. Then, a century or 2 centuries, 3 centuries later, they suddenly come round and say that, well, steady on, chaps, you can't be homophobic, when they themselves imported it into Africa. Well, how do you get your head around that?
Okay, so I think what has happened here is, you know, it's like a two-way thing, because like at the end of the day, with colonization, the key thing there was just, it was all about economic like
Political.
intent and trying to, exploitation, right? So you got that. So then, and also this thing, economic thing, is not just about that, it's about the kind of ideas that you use and to sort of like, inseminate into people. And then like when you've got the sort of like the Christianity just feeding into that as well, and then like, you're taught it in such a way that it's a very authoritarian top-down way of thinking about things, and it doesn't allow you to sort of like challenge things, and then you accept it. And then also, like, I feel like with colonialism, there was a lot of resistance, because I don't want to say that we didn't resist it, there was, but there was an awful lot of people want acceptance. And Fanon kind of talks about this as well. Frantz Fanon, who is a kind of like a philosopher, he talks about this internalization of that kind of colonized
Psychologist, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of that. So like, it's sort of, like you internalize it so that you get acceptance, when in actual fact the colonizers are never going to forget you, not going to really accept you. And then like, like you say, 200-300 years down the line, and then like, when they're trying to change the way that people have thought. I mean, like think 200-300 years, it's a long time. If that's what people are thinking all that time, it's very difficult for them to change it. But then also, I think it's about power as well. And it's about power, and it's about knowledge, and it's about the way that, the knowledge is just kind of like inseminated. Because like if it's, you're told this, like, gay people are bad and all this, that, and the other, and you just keep hearing it drip, 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 and then people just accept it, and you're hearing it from people that are in a position of power. People will internalize it, and then like, like they shift the narrative to make it look like, the people that they colonized are uncivil, or even more uncivilized for not, for being homophobic, when they've actually the ones that caused all of this. So, I can see where it's coming from, but then I also think that we have the power to sort of like change the way that we're thinking, because like at the end of the day, it's not the same, right? Because every form of discrimination is different. Because like, as a Black woman, I'm discriminated against by some people, right? As a working class person, you're going to be discriminated against by some people and stuff. But the thing we have to realize is that, like, you know what, there are people out there who are discriminating against us, like, who are oppressing us by the very nature of who we are. So I think sometimes there's nothing wrong with us being a little bit mindful of that, like when you're treating other people who may not be like you. That's my feeling on that.
So empathy based on your own lived experience of being very unfairly treated and discriminated against.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's a different form of discrimination, but I don't see why you can't be kind of like empathy, and I just don't see why you can't see people for just what they are. I mean, I think for me, the lesson really kind of hit home when I, because I I always had issues when people were being homophobic, but when I was a student, an undergraduate student, and I used to live in halls, and I used to live, there were two gay guys who lived in my halls. And the thing is you know what, they were just the kindest people ever. You know, they when I had no food, you know, they gave me food. And like my best friend also, he was gay, and like, you know, they just looked after me. So it was just like, okay, they're just people, just as they saw me, you know.
So what you're saying is that on a human level,
Yeah.
they actually behave better than far more heterosexuals that you knew.
No, I wouldn't say. I mean, you know, like, because I had
Or
some
as
very,
well as, at least
yeah,
as well as.
yeah. I mean, I think in a way you can't, in that sense, you can't really compare. But you know, like
Right.
at the end of the day, they just looked out for me. Do you know what I mean? We
Yeah.
just looked out for each other when we were in trouble. So that's just as far as I saw it. So I just think that people need to be looking past certain things and they're seeing people as people. You know.
Okay. Look, I'm going to move on
Mm.
from this one. The third taboo is pop culture. What's hip and what's not hip? You know, I know by my own experience that owing purely to the circumstances under which I grew
Mm.
up totally liking the wrong kind of music.
Oh yeah, me too.
Totally liking the wrong kind of music. And if I hadn't gone to Ghana for my first degree, I would I would still be very much in that kind of genre of music. And I found that actually there was some fairly strict kind of admonitions and prescriptions of no, this isn't music. You should be listening to this kind of music. Amongst those who are crude, amongst those who are polite, they kind of look at you and kind of go, tut tut. I mean, like,
Mm-mm.
poor child, how you been misled? You should know better than this, you know.
Mm.
But if I came out with jazz was, you know, permissible. R&B
Mm.
was cool. But some of the other stuff I used to listen to was definitely not cool. And I'm not going to skew the interview by going into that now. What kind of elements of pop culture have you ever seen taboos in, Louise?
Right. Okay. So this is one is a bit close to my heart because I'm actually writing about this. So
Oh, good.
yeah, yeah. So when when I was growing up, like, you know, the biggest music, not you know, people were into, if you were black and sort of UK born, particularly. So I'm just talking about us lot. But like, you know, it was either hip hop, it was R&B, it was
Mhm.
some kind, you know, bashment. So they were the big three. They were the big three. Um, so when I was growing up as well, or soul, you know, soul. But
Oh,
when I
soul.
was,
No,
yeah,
soul was.
when I was growing up, we like, you know, like high life was the dominant music in our house because, you know, my mum and dad, and it wasn't just them, it was just sort of like, you know, that sort of older generation of
Of
Ghanaians who
Africans.
came,
Yeah,
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 of
Ghanaians,
Africans
yeah.
who came. So, you know, and I think it's looking at it from a Ghanaian perspective, but I think there are some aspects that kind of you know, like affect a lot of other groups as well. But you know, there was a perception that, like, you know, music could make you certain kinds of music could make you rebellious, right?
Gee.
And you know, you could see this with more broadly because I mean, I think if you look at sort of the punk culture, you know, older generations were very worried about that. Or like, you know, the rave culture, which I really liked, you know, that they were worried about that because I remember sometimes, you know,
Were you into rave?
I did, I love,
Louise,
I still like
you
it.
rebel, you.
I know I'm terrible. I'm going to hell, but you know, I no, I love rave music. And end of story. But you know, like some in 1989, I do remember like there was a huge moral panic
Yeah.
about the rave culture and you know, like the ecstasies and all this that and the other. And like forgetting that people, I don't even drink. You know, I don't drink. I certainly never took any drugs, but that was the dominant perspective. So like, you know, you've got that in society between the generations as it is, but then also, like, you know, when you've got the Ghana, you know, like you've got our African parents, bless them, you know, like I think they wanted us to keep as much as the culture as possible. And I get that, I totally get it. But at the same time, it's almost like, okay, you know, there's only so much of that you can do because like we're born outside of thingy. So like,
Yeah.
you know, if you start to like a different kind of music apart from high life or gospel or whatever, you know, like you're finished basically. So
I see.
me,
I think, yeah. Go. No,
you're,
please go ahead.
no, go
Go
on,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, but I mean, for me, the indicator was drugs.
Yeah.
So that if you saw somebody like Jimi Hendrix, which I loved,
Yeah.
um, the Rolling Stones, which I also liked.
Mm.
Actually, the Rolling Stones music was all black music
Yeah.
originally. They learned from Howlin' Wolf and people like that. But they were they came across as bad boys, and this was a big red flag in my family. Was that why couldn't I listen to, Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, or
Mm.
they actually liked a lot of kind of Western style music. I mean,
Mm.
I heard things like Pat Reeves and Pat Boone, do you know what I mean? Of course, apart
Mm.
from the high life, which was de rigueur, but
Mm.
I think it was the association of Western cultural music with drugs that just made them lose their
It,
cool.
and it's a certain type, isn't it? Because like paradoxically, like if you listen to classical music, that was okay. And that was okay because that was seen as kind of like civilized. But
Yeah.
like if you
Well, there
for
was
us,
no. Well, actually, classical composers, but they were doing opium and all sorts of things. But
yeah,
it's not advertised with with Beethoven, Bach, and the others, is it?
no,
So
of course it isn't. But no, that was seen as okay. But yeah, I mean, I got into rave music just by accident, really. I got into it because I it was my brother, and he doesn't. I don't think he realizes it, but it was him because like he was messing about with the radio. He used to like messing about with things, and then he was messing about with the radio and stuff, and then he left it on a pirate station. And like I just I was in my room and I was kind of like listening to it and stuff like that. And then I always remember this tune. It was Zero B Lockup. That was the name of the tune. So
what was it
from
called?
then,
Zero.
Zero B Lockup.
Okay, Zero B
Yeah,
Lockup.
I'll send it. I'll tweet it or something. But anyway,
Yeah.
so I got into that, and then from then, like I was just like, this is me. This music is me. It's like it's high energy. It's sort of like it's a bit frenetic, and this it. And
Oh,
but what people also forget as well about with rave culture, again, a lot of it is kind of like rooted in black music because I think I can't for the life of me I cannot remember. Um, the name of the person that did it, but like a lot of the breakbeat kind of like is comes from this 60s soul tune called Amen. Do you know? So it comes from there, emerged from house music, but it actually from disco and stuff like that. So again, it kind of like it came from black cultures, but people tend to forget that. They tend to forget that's what it was, but it was just not the one thing to do. I mean, the our parents' generation didn't like it,
they didn't
and then
appreciate it.
they didn't, and then
Louise, can I shuffle you on because
yeah, of course.
because there are other bits of pop culture which may have raised taboos. What about fashion? What about body image? What about skin shade?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I mean, I think in terms of fashion, again, like I remember again, sort of like in the late 80s, early 90s and stuff, it was all about the baggy jeans, wasn't it? It was all about the baggy jeans and everything. But sometimes if you dressed a bit differently, it was just like, okay, well, why are you dressing like that? Why are you not like the rest of us? And it's a bit like, again,
At
fix
different
like
age,
different,
you were born in a different place. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I quite like 60s stuff. I quite like 60s stuff, and I used to wear a lot of that, but it just was what it was. But I
Mm.
mean, I think like your sense of self, it comes through your music, it comes through your
Mm.
clothes stuff and stuff. And the thing is, I think if you are it's not good to sort of like merge. Now I notice that with the next generation that they're a lot more sort of like fluid in terms of the way that they dress and the way that they listen to music or whatever, which I think is great. I mean, Generation Z is just breaking all the boundaries. In
Mm.
terms of body image as well, that was a very interesting one as well, because I felt like sometimes there's a bit of a clash. Because I mean, back home, obviously the thing was like if you were kind of big, it showed that you were wealthy, right? You know, and then
Well
like
fed, well to do, even though
yeah,
you might be, kind of nurturing a heart attack or hypertension or diabetes or all of
yeah,
those
yeah, yeah.
things. Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it showed that you were healthy, and I think that's a bit tricky because, as you say, there could be a lot of health repercussions that come out of that, but it's not always kind of like, it's not thought about. It's about how you look outside, the the
Right.
the the impression that you give. I mean, it just reminds me of this theorist that we look at in sociology called Goffman, impression management. In the front region, you're fat, you're healthy, but in the back region, you're dying of a heart attack. So,
Right.
you've got that, but then you come here, like, if you're like that, it's I mean, on the one hand, like, there are some aspects. If you've got a big chest, you've got a big body, big bottom, it's fine, like, that's the thing. But then you have to be kind of thin in the middle. So
Hmm.
you've got that sort of clash. And then, like,
Tension.
you've got people online, sort of like, there's these like groups online, pro anorexia, pro bulimia, this kind of stuff, like, prompting you to do another thing. So I think it's just really messy. It's just really, really messy,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, so yeah.
Okay. I'm going to hop on to the last two.
Mm,
Now, this one's really tricky. Um, what are the taboos about speaking up about the whole of the coronavirus pandemic? Now, that's a tricky one
it is.
because if my observation is that um, people in the diaspora aren't rebellious. They want to keep their heads down and get on with their business. When trouble comes, it's not because they're making trouble, it's because they be poked. Somebody's
Mm,
bringing them trouble. Now, of course, with the younger generation, they grew up here and they were born here. And their expectations of life and ambitions and aspirations the same as anybody else who watches the TV and sees the ads and sees the lifestyles that are being promoted and projected. However, when it comes to this pandemic, they're too young. The young people are too young. First of
mm,
all, at a certain age in life, many people think they're kind of low key immortal. So that the possibility of adverse reactions and so on and so forth isn't very present. But in the older Black generation, would you say that it was a taboo for them to speak up about what their real thoughts are about this pandemic and the treatment and the impacts for Black people and so on? What's your view?
I think it's a taboo. I think it's a fear. But then I think what also doesn't help is the kind of misinformation that they're getting. And I think that kind of reinforces that fear, um, of speaking up about it and of asking questions. Now, I mean, we have a running joke about, like, WhatsApp aunties. The way that they will put all this stuff. I mean, I've had some messages from people and stuff. They'll put in all this stuff, very unfounded, information. So then, they're just like, no, they've internalized it and everything. But then at the same time, they know that in society, if you start sort of like speaking up, this is, you're gonna get
Get in
labeled
trouble.
negatively. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think there should be an open dialogue because, like, at the end of the day, like, if you don't talk about what it is that you're thinking, you're not going to get the information that may help to reassure you,
But
and I
why,
think,
excuse me, is
yeah,
it an assumption that that they need reassurance, or is it more a case of they need the information so they can make an informed? The important thing is to make an informed decision, one
yeah,
way or the other. And I wouldn't, I certainly, as an advocate, somebody who is in journalism, I'm an advocate for free speech.
yeah,
Absolutely have to be an advocate for free speech. And I'm terrified by situations when people's speech is censored
yeah,
unfairly in an
mm,
unfounded way. So,
mm,
my position on this very much is give people information from multiple sources, but
yeah,
information of quality. So
yeah,
then they can decide what it is they're doing instead of, kind of tossing superstitions around and hearsay and tittle tattle, and yeah, some of the memes which go out around COVID are
Yeah,
really.
and I think that I agree with you, because I think this is sometimes what has happened. And when I say reassurance, I mean, that might be in the sense of, okay, like if some of them may be just unsure, so like,
Mhm.
like it helps. And also, having the right, having, like information that isn't dubious and that it's been well researched, like, it allows people to just kind of say, okay, well, these are the fears and the worries and the thoughts that I have. And then also, like, it allows them to ask the right questions. I mean, and the thing is, if you don't, I mean, you have to make the decisions, but then sometimes part of that process is asking the right questions and asking the questions to the people. I mean, I said this to my dad. He was sort of like and ahhing about a few things and stuff, and I said to him that, look, you know what I think you need to do is, I think you need to research. And I said, don't be researching this stuff that people are sending on WhatsApp. I think what you need to be doing is, I think you need to be just kind of like, going online and just be very, very selective of what you check. Speak to your doctor, you know, and make a decision for yourself, because you're in your 80s now. Do you know what I mean? And so, you need to sort of
That's important.
be
It's very
thinking.
important. You see, Louise, I mean, one of the issues here for me is that
Mm,
when the differential rates of death
mm,
from this pandemic, the kind of the first and the second spikes that happened in Britain, a man like me was judged as being twice as likely to die as a white person. Now,
mm.
immediately, what that said to me was that a man like me couldn't stay quiet.
Yeah.
I
I
have
mean,
more skin in the game than the average person. And so I would have thought that my opinion actually counted for something. But here we are. I do believe that one of the taboos uh, on this is an externally imposed taboo, is for Black people to speak up. Black people are supposed to speak when they're spoken to, but they don't volunteer stuff. And this, for me, is a major problem in the face of what is potentially a life changing, life threatening, even condition. So, Black people need to break that taboo of sitting back, being silent, and watching, because as long as we are silent, it seems to me, all the decisions will be made for us by people who don't have a clue how it feels to live in our skins.
yeah, I mean, I agree, and I would say that again, that has a lot to do with sort of like, the past, because you think about it, like, in the past, in the colonial era, I mean, everything was very top down. It was in a very sort of like authoritarian way of dealing things. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at, like, the authoritarian personality, for instance, by this guy called Adorno, one thing that he says that, like, the authoritarian personality, they kind of like imbibe a lot of rules and
Who is Adorno? Can you see
okay, so his
what?
name is Theodore Adorno, and he is I think he's a sort of sociologist clash philosopher. And he
Right.
wrote this thing about, he was trying to sort of like understand why people, do, like, he was talking about it in terms of the war, and why people sort of, behaved in certain ways and didn't challenge authority. And then
Hmm.
he came up with this idea of the authoritarian personality, and um,
Right.
I apply that to sort of like, the colonial era, because again,
Hmm.
like, people just kind of like, and in a way, it's almost like, people, I think they felt like they had no choice but to kind of like obey the rules. Not everybody, but like to obey the rules. And I think that has kind of like carried on through the generation, because like people just don't, they're afraid of
Out of the
asking, and like
mindset.
you say.
Out of the mindset.
But then also, I think it's that, I mean, in terms of what you were saying about you, like, being one of the people that were more likely to die and stuff. I mean, I remember as a Black person,
Well, that was
and
a
I think
number. Yeah,
yeah,
that
but,
is
but
ONS.
Yeah, but
Office of National Statistics. Yeah.
but you see, I mean, I think there's a problem with that because number
Okay.
one, like it's lumping us all together because, like,
Right.
the thing is, not there is an assumption that all of us are doing sort of like front-facing roles. I mean, I guess I am because I'm a lecturer and stuff like that, but at the same time, I'm not out on the buses or
Well,
I'm not.
yeah. No, that stat was with everything factored in, so that we were really comparing apples to apples. In factoring in the fact that a proportion of us in frontline roles functioning into a smaller proportion of us. Well, I've never been in the front. I mean, I only enter the front line when I walk into the supermarket. You
Mm,
know, and I certainly during the spike avoided kind of medical environments where I could come across people who were ill or unwell and so on and so forth as much as possible. As much
yeah,
not to spread anything to them as for me to get anything that I didn't want to.
no, I get it.
I
I
didn't
get
want to
it.
catch. Yeah.
I get it,
So
but I mean, the thing is, it's just like not everybody will see it. Not everybody will just kind of like make. And the thing, listen, I'm not kind of like having to go at people that are because, like, but a lot of my family work for the NHS and everything, and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
not
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not about that,
It's not a
But
choice they have. Yeah, it's their
sorry.
career. It's not a
Yeah,
choice.
but
It's
then
their
also,
career.
like,
Yeah.
for some people, they don't have a choice. And like the thing is, it's just like, but at the same time, you can't assume that everybody does. I mean, I know that it does kind of like, include everything, but like at the same time, there are some people that will not look beyond the
Yes.
data. They'll
Yes.
not look, they'll just assume that everybody's doing the same thing. When in actual
Right.
fact, you have to kind of like, but I mean, some of, there was a whole thing about the vitamin D and everything. And yes, like our levels are lower. I mean, I know, like I know that I have issues with vitamin D and all this that, and the other. But I think you have to kind of like recognize the nuances when you're analyzing this kind of data. And I think we have to recognize that as well. I think we need to inform ourselves. And in terms of the wider thing of speaking out, again, I think like people should speak out. They should speak out about the fears. They should speak out about what they think, but then also be informed when you're speaking out. Be
Absolutely.
informed.
Absolutely.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, we're running out of time, Louise. And
Mhm.
so the final chestnut, of course, the final taboo is religiosity. Of course, Africans have to be religious, don't they? I mean, it's
Is
a
it?
huge taboo. Well, would you say? No, you tell me. I mean, I'm not yet.
No, no. I mean, I think people, they don't have to be. They don't
Yeah,
have to be. I mean, it
yeah.
may be that like they might
Isn't
grow.
it a taboo, though, not to be religious? I mean, there are two things here. There's spirituality,
Yeah,
and then there's religiosity. I'm talking about the whole business of
right.
being seen to be dolled up and going to church and kind of worshipping in a public place. Now they can't do it anymore. People have to do it online, but it still goes
Yeah,
on online.
yeah.
Because
But
if
I
I
mean,
look,
oh, sorry.
sorry,
Go on. No, no, no. Go on.
so
Go on. Go on.
if I look at the people on social media, my goodness, every day, the number, I run a couple of groups on Facebook, the number of people I have to kick off because they're coming onto my group to promote their ministry. It's like the fastest growing product group in history. So that is not about spirituality. That is about religiosity, and that's why I suggested that maybe it arises out of a taboo in our society that there's something wrong with you if you don't go to some religious following. What do
Yeah.
you make of
No,
that?
right. You know what? I think it's this, right? Because
Sure.
sometimes people use like religion and religiosity
Yeah.
as a way to kind of like formulate a community. And I think this is particularly true of Africans and like who are migrants and everything.
Yeah.
One of my friends, Abel Ugba, he did quite a lot of research on Africans in Ireland, and it was like the religion was seen as a way of a kind of collectivity, a Gemeinschaft way. Gemeinschaft means collectivity. So that's what it can be. And also I guess like when you're facing things like racism and stuff outside, maybe, you know, like seeing your own peeps, this is the way that, you know, it links people. But then on the other hand, there is often an expectation that this is what you do, and that, like, you know, somehow if you don't do that, then you're not. I don't want to say you're not a proper person, and I'm not saying that this is the case for all people. Do you know what I mean? But like, and sadly, there's a lot of people that will judge you because you're not, you know, part of a religious group. I mean, I again, I can remember sort of like, oh, but I mean, you know, like a really, really silly example. I remember coming back from Zumba in Lewisham one day, and you know, I've got arthritis. I had a flare up that day, and basically, I was told that the reason why I've got a flare up is because, like, I don't belong to a I don't, you know, I don't go to church. I'm like, what the, you know, what? Where's this coming from? And I'm just like, no, man, I've got a flare up because I've got arthritis. But oh, join us. We can pray you out of this. I'm like, no, you know, I'm fine. I'll go home and I'll put my feet in ice and I'll be all right, you know. So it's that, sometimes it's that sort of thing that, you know, it's and for some people it's pressure. You know, I know people that, you know, they felt pressure to conform and all this, that, and the other. And then, you know, the worrying thing is like when that blurs. I mean, I think I'm quite spiritual. Okay, I grew up in like a Catholic household and everything, but I don't really go to church. But, you know, like I will nip in, and, you know, if I need a bit of time to myself, I will. But I think I'm more spiritual than anything. But sometimes I think people blur that boundaries between sort of like, you know, religiosity and spirituality. And, you know, and then sometimes when they get it wrong, this is when it really starts getting dangerous. And then when they start judging you because, like, you know, you don't do this and you don't conform, you know, like that's when it gets dangerous. What you were saying there about, you know, people trying to join their ministries and everything, sometimes I think that, you know, this is another branch of capitalism gone wrong, because like people are trying to make money.
Well, you know, the interesting thing is that reverse missionaries are all the rage, because it looks as if African priests are coming back now to the former colonial countries with more religious fervor than the local priests here have. And so actually it's a thing, it's an emerging trend. So again, that puts pressure on people to be, or that rather reflects the religiosity of African people. But as you've explained, it is a vector for building communities in a difficult circumstance, and so on and so forth. Louise, I'm going to call that quits tonight.
Okay, thank you.
It's been fascinating chatting to you and listening to you.
No, like, I've enjoyed this. Thank you very, very much. Sorry, I know I have a lot to say. I have a lot to say about
no, that's why. Well, that's exactly why you're here. Please come again on Tete a Tete.
I will.
And
absolutely.
you know, we'll pick up the conversation from there.
Okay.
But my dear friends, thank you so much. Hang on a minute. There's another question here. Well, here's an African who's got a different point of view. She says religion is the root of all evil. Now that's a strong statement. Not my words. That's a listener from somewhere up north, actually.
Yeah,
But
that person may have been stung quite badly.
Yeah. So yeah, and you know, there we are. But Louise, thank you so much, and thanks for everybody who was listening. I'm going to post this up again on YouTube. So by all means, please subscribe, comment, and share. And Louise, thank you very much for coming. It's been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you.
We're going to go off. We're going to end the stream.